So, what's the real purpose of an ontological leader, or a person who takes leadership as a way of being and has this big idea or this big mission or big goal that they're committed to? First of all, a leader defines the purpose of the group. Without a meaningful and clear purpose, it's impossible to develop a high level of morale and motivation in any group. People need to know the purpose of what they're doing. Without leaders, who would believe in the purpose, communicate it, follow it, and make sure the members work in accordance with it? Motivation and productivity die on or are never given birth to without the leader. A leader also establishes values. They define the values and principles that leaders and members will stick to when making decisions. The values that they define must be clear and easy to understand. They must appeal to people in the group. They must help make people's decision-making easier and more responsible, and they must be cross-culturally meaningful. The leader should also have a clear view of the group's citizenship. That's how the group will act as a responsible member of society, in the same way an individual citizen would. Group citizenship is really the application of Buddhist right view and right company to groups instead of individuals. Now, let's talk about the character of a leader. Again, the leader's main purpose is to clarify the purpose of the group, to define the values of the group, to build faith inside of the group, and to make right decisions for the advancement of the group or the group's ultimate goals. So those are the main purposes: clarifying the purpose of the group, defining the values of the group, building faith and belief and buy-in inside of the group, and making right decisions for the group and for the big goal. So leadership is not some overly complex thing. It's not something that you need to read a million books about. It's not something that you need to take millions of classes on or so many workshops or anything like that. That's what you do as a leader. You create a big goal. You clarify the purpose of the group. You define the values of the group. You build faith and buy-in inside the group. And you try to make right decisions on big picture issues. That's it. A leader with character and integrity makes the best type. This is different from technical skill. So we're going to talk about this more in this module or in these lessons in the theory module. But again, we're focusing on ontological leadership or leadership as a way of being. So we're not really focused on technical skills. We're focused on character and integrity and the ability to motivate people. So Buddhism offers a list of 7 character traits of an ideal person that you should strive for if you want to lead with character. Those are understanding, principles, and causes. So leaders should be able to identify the causes of problems and the principles that should be applied to solving them. Leaders should have understanding of the objectives and results. They should know the meaning and objectives of the principles they live and work by. They should understand the work they're setting out to do. They should understand the reasons behind their actions. And they should have an idea about what will happen in the future as a result of their actions and whether these results will be good or bad. So this is going to bring us back to this idea of complex interdependency, deep ecology, systems thinking, and so on. So leaders also need to understand themselves. They should know their strengths, aptitudes, abilities, and virtues, and be able to correct and improve themselves. They should also be aware of their personal weaknesses and the weaknesses of the group. And we'll talk about that in this module also, about being authentic about your inauthenticities and being aware of your own personal weaknesses and the weaknesses of those around you a lot of times. A good leader should understand moderation. They should practice moderation in speech, work, and action. They should not undertake useless action just to satisfy their egos or for self-serving purposes. Let's correct a couple of these here real quickly. I don't like to see the red lines. Also, leaders should only commit to action that will benefit the organization for which they're responsible. A good leader understands the season and the efficient use of time. They know the proper time for actions, what should be done and how, and then they perform these actions efficiently. A good leader understands the group. Groups have rules and regulations. Groups have culture and traditions. The individuals in the group have needs that should be dealt with and served well. So good leaders know that not only their own character, but the character of their group, and they understand their responsibility for developing and nurturing that character, both their own character and the character of the group. And they understand people. A good leader should be able to know the differences between individuals and should know how to relate to people well, what can be learned from them, and how they should be praised, criticized, advised, and trained. We also want to focus as leaders on overcoming the 8 worldly concerns. Those are becoming upset when someone insults you. When somebody with an untrained mind gets insulted, they become angry. However, a person with a trained mind asks themselves, what is the motivation of the person insulting me? Is this person competent to hold an opinion? And is the opinion justified? If it's justified, then try to learn and make progress from the mistake. If it's unjustified, just take it as an opportunity for being praised. You want to avoid becoming too happy when someone praises you or gives you credit. The trained mind asks itself, what is the motivation of the person praising me? Is the praise being given by someone who understands what has been accomplished? Is the person's judgment valuable, or do they just want to make you happy or flatter you because they want something in return? Avoid feeling depressed when you fail. The trained mind will analyze whether the failure is due to mistakes or external circumstances. If it's due to mistakes, you just try to see if anything can be learned from this for the future. You want to avoid feeling too happy when you succeed. So the trained mind reflects on the contributions of others and the circumstances that made success possible, rather than just gloating in their own victory. Avoid feeling hopeless when you become poor, feeling overjoyed when you gain wealth, feeling upset when you don't get recognition, and feeling too happy when you've achieved fame. So all of this stuff really relates to the Majjhima Patipada, or the middle path, which we'll continually talk about in this training program. So we want to just try to occupy a middle position, not a position of extremes if possible. So the pattern is to celebrate joyful events without becoming too attached to their meaning, in the present or as a predictor of the future, and to clearly evaluate perceived internal and external factors and their relevance to you. Okay, in this lesson we want to talk about Buddhist values as a foundation for leadership. So if leaders observe these teachings, take them to heart, and apply them to their conduct, character, morality, and ethics, business or group dynamics will definitely improve. So the first thing we want to talk about is right understanding. This is the knowledge that everything is perception. All attitudes are formed by the mind. There are no external causes to happiness or unhappiness, and these causes are only internal. In fact, happiness is a choice. Leaders should make right understanding synonymous with personal responsibility and managing their own behavior through internal methods. Responsible leaders are compelled to do the right thing in relation to others. Responsible leaders focus on the concern of others, a duty to act on this principle, and accountability for the results of their action. Ineffective leaders look for someone to blame when something goes wrong, and they want praise when something goes right. This concept of self-grasping is in opposition to the Buddhist teaching, where the emphasis is directed outwards towards cherishing others. Effective leaders embrace collectivism and self-sacrifice for the good of the many as part of their culture. Now, we want to talk about the drivers for effective leaders. Those are going to be basically presence, openness, clarity, intention, personal responsibility, intuition, creativity, and connected communication. These are all the drivers for right understanding. The next thing we want to talk about is right thought. Right thought is developed through renouncing selfish motives and projects and cherishing outwards. Right thought avoids violence in action or speech to achieve desired results. Leaders know themselves so they can understand the minds of others more clearly. This thinking capacity is the result of meditation. Time to think allows a leader to focus on the needs, wants, and desires of his group and allows him to widen his mental capacity. So this type of right thought is the result of applied meditation practice, and specifically probably vipassana, where you're really focusing on dukkha, anicca, and anatta, or unsatisfactoriness, impermanence, and no permanent self. Next, we want to think about right speech. Saying what you mean and meaning what you say is right speech. You want to avoid harmful or divisive speech. You need to extol the virtues and good qualities of others while avoiding mindless chatter. Engaging in wholesome conversation leads to a good reputation. No one really respects gossipers and backbiters, right? So, if you're trying to lead others, one of the quickest ways that you can gain respect is to just engage in wholesome conversation and wholesome speech, and do what you mean and mean what you say. Then we've got the value of right action. By using right action, you as a leader can be proud of all your actions. Virtuous conduct builds a solid, virtuous reputation. There's also this issue of karma, where positive actions will generate positive effects, and negative actions will generate negative effects. These may not occur immediately, but they could take even months or years or more to manifest. That's why it's really important to understand deep ecology and causality as well. One of the things that is worth mentioning here is that the idea, or even the word virtue, has really sort of gone out of style in the West. The absence of virtue can explain why so much violence and negativity exist in our Western societies. The next value we want to think about is right livelihood. Some work is not suitable for a virtuous person to do or pursue. Steve Jobs said, "Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking. Don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know it when you find it." Our next value is right effort. Nothing worthwhile is achieved without effort. And we've talked about this a little bit already. The effort you as a leader put in requires discipline. Now, the main enemy of effort is laziness. The laziness of being attracted to what is worthless or non-virtuous, and the laziness of discouragement. So we want to be really active, really high energy, and we want to do that by doing worthwhile, virtuous things and keeping ourselves encouraged and positive. Right mindfulness is our next value, similar to self-awareness that's talked about in emotional intelligence material. So emotional intelligence helps you thrive when coping with difficult or stressful situations. Emotional intelligence includes self-management, self-awareness, empathy, and self-motivation. And then finally, we have right concentration. The truth is we live in a very distracted society. Leaders try to multitask, but the truth is that we can only do one thing at a time. Building up concentration through samatha meditation, which is covered in the meditation course, is really a great way to increase your ability to concentrate on whatever the task at hand is. So we want to the greatest extent possible, try and employ all of these values as people, as individuals, as leaders of ourselves, and as leaders of others. So we said earlier in the frameworks module that internal leadership, this leadership of yourself, is really the earth element or the earth quadrant in leadership. So we want to explore that in a little bit more detail here in this lesson, which will be on internal leadership. The main emphasis for internal leadership is on correct action. That includes right view and recognizing that a thing is only useful if it leads to right action. Then we've got this Pali term, samadhi. The historical Buddha said, don't go by reports, by legends, by traditions, by scripture, by logical conjecture, by inference, or by analogies, by agreement through pondering views, by probability, or by the thought. This contemplative is our teacher. When you know for yourselves that these qualities are unskillful, these qualities are blameworthy, these qualities are criticized by the wise, these qualities, when adopted and carried out, lead to harm and to suffering, then you should abandon them. So when you know something, the right view, and it takes the right view to lead to right action, when you know that a view or an action leads to harm and suffering, you need to eliminate that view and not do that action. Similarly, he said, when you know for yourself that these qualities are skillful, these qualities are blameless, these qualities are praised by the wise, these qualities, when adopted and carried out, lead to welfare and happiness, then you should enter and remain in them. So, right view has two main parts. Oops. Let's go back to that. So there's the decision-making process that's based on the three marks of existence, or the vimokkha, the vimokkha. The Buddha said, as he attends inappropriately in this way, one of 6 kinds of views arises in him. The view, I have a self, arises in him as true and established, or the view, I have no self, or the view, it is precisely by means of self that I perceive self, or the view, it is precisely by means of self that I perceive non-self, or the view, it is precisely by means of non-self that I perceive self arises in him as true and established, or else he has a view like this. This very self of mine, the knower that is sensitive here and there to the ripening of good and bad actions, is the self of mine that is constant, everlasting, eternal, not subject to change, and will endure as long as eternity. This is called a thicket of views, a wilderness of views, a contortion of views, a writhing of views, a fetter of views. Bound by a fetter of views, the uninstructed run-of-the-mill person is not freed from birth, aging, death, from sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair. He is not freed, I tell you, from suffering and stress. The well-instructed disciple of the noble ones discerns what ideas are fit for attention and what ideas are unfit for attention. This being so, he does not attend to ideas unfit for attention and attends instead to ideas fit for attention. He attends appropriately. This is stress. This is the origination of stress. This is the cessation or the end of stress. This is the way leading to the cessation of stress. And he attends appropriately in this way. 3 fetters are abandoned in him: identity view, doubt, and grasping at perceptions and practices. So the other thing that we want to talk about is correct action, and we'll cover that a little bit more later also. So a good leader is one who has the right views and who makes the right decisions and takes the right actions. Effective leadership is based on having the right intentions and motivations. It should be beneficial to you and everyone affected by it. So again, we're back to this idea of deep ecology. And the leader should consider the well-being of self and others. Next, we want to talk about the basis of systems thinking or ecological thinking. So, the first thing we want to talk about is change and interdependence. There's dependent origination. Everything depends on something else for its origination or its inception. Everything is tangled in this web, in this net of complex interdependency. This is because that is, or A exists because B exists, and A's existence is contingent upon B's existence. B's existence is contingent upon A's existence. This is not that because that is not. This ceases to be because that ceases to be. So everything's in this process, in this state of complex interdependency, and the origins of everything are dependent on other things as well. The Theravada tradition records as a fundamental axiom the principle that a single cause does not give rise to either a single result or several results, nor do several causes give rise to just one result, but rather several causes give rise to several results. The next thing we want to talk about is anicca. So this is the idea of impermanence. All conditioned existence, without exception, is temporary or in a state of constant flux. Whatever is subject to origination is subject to cessation, or whatever has a beginning also has an end. All formations are impermanent. Interaction, processing, interaction. Let me say that again. Interaction, processing, interaction is all that really exists. You can't hold on to fixed goals and objectives thinking these will lead to a permanent positive state. You have to be fluid as a leader and dynamic and have presence of mind and realize that every goal is a moving target. That's why, just to go back to that for a minute, in the strategy training material, when we do the Sun Tzu simplified stuff, we go through this 4-step process, and then everything is reviewed, and then the goals are tweaked, the goals are changed, because it's this recognition of anicca or impermanence, and that we're always aiming for a moving target. So we need to recalibrate our goals on a regular basis. So how does cause and effect interact, or how do cause and effect interact? Really just as a holistic, external view of the world. Now, if you don't understand that air external view of the world, I recommend going back into the meditation training course and looking at the evolution of consciousness video. And we've got a pretty detailed description of that air external worldview there. Now, systemic thinking requires a focused, unfettered mind, or you become disturbed and inefficient and you can't see reality. You have to understand that any decision you make creates change. There will be uncountable reactions to that change. Some of them will be good, some of them will be bad. Now, normal people can't see all possible outcomes of a decision. This is why motivation and intention are so important. Leaders who have the right intention and thoroughly think about the ramifications of their decisions will make fewer mistakes. Right view requires the capability of awareness and a lessening of the hindrances or the nivaranas. Next, we want to talk about right action a little bit more. Just dive down into this a little bit more. This is the quality of the actions you and your group take as a result of decisions based on right view. Now, before taking any action, you should consider their effects upon you and others. Action initiated by groups can accomplish things an individual can't, but also affect multiple individual members individually. So you want to be really, really present and aware and think about what the ramifications of your decisions and actions and the consequences of your decisions and actions are going to be. And by just being aware of that, by thinking about that, you'll make fewer mistakes. We want to also talk about clinging, thirst, or desire, or the Pali word would be tanha. This is the root cause of unhappiness, desire. This is the cause of negative thoughts and actions. When you reduce desire or clinging or thirst, your relationships with people, the world around you, and your own life will improve. One of the reasons for this is because people prefer to deal with someone interested in them rather than someone only interested in themselves. And most people try to impose their ideas and convince the other person of their own excellence without showing any real interest in the other person. You've probably experienced this where you're talking to somebody and you realize that they're not really listening to you, they're just waiting for their turn to speak. So, when you're making decisions, there are some important questions you have to ask. Let's correct this real quickly. The first question you need to ask is the result of my decision beneficial to my group? Is the result of this decision beneficial for anyone else who might be affected? Or is it harmful for anyone else who might be affected? What are my motivations and intentions behind this decision? And am I motivated by selfishness or by creating benefits for others? So all of that's really just that four-step process. That those four questions will help you with internal leadership quite a bit. Is the result of this decision beneficial for the people around me or my group? Is the result of this decision beneficial or harmful for anyone else who will be affected? What are my motivations and intentions in making this decision? And am I being motivated by selfishness or by creating benefit for other people? So very important set of questions. I'd really recommend writing those down and just maybe even putting them up on your wall, putting them up in your office, wherever you spend a lot of time, wherever you make important decisions, just to run down this list of four questions. So, great leaders recognize both their influence on others and others' influence on them and their organization. So this is really like this air quadrant type of internal leadership. The goal is to look at an issue from many perspectives. You want to look at an issue in the short term. You want to look at an issue in the long term. You want to look at the issue from the point of view of all the stakeholders and use that expanded view to make the right decisions. So now that we've talked about internal leadership, let's talk a little bit about executive leadership. So for being an effective executive leader and a leader of other people, you really need to focus on the big, crazy goal. And we've talked about this at length and really stepping into becoming congruent with that kind of big, crazy goal. So you want no more than one big goal, and every sub-goal that you have should ensure the success of the big goal. This is very similar to the material in another video I have on radical time management and productivity. So I highly suggest watching that also. The big goal also has to have a clear and clearly defined finish line. From X to Y by when, by what time. You need to focus attention and action on the measurable steps. The leverage points are different for every big goal. So there are different points of leverage, different areas that you need to really focus on for every specific big goal, and those are always different. Leverage is always going to be something that leads to the big goal. It's something that we can influence and something that we can make a reasonable prediction about. So depending on the situation, you need to, once you've established your big goal, you really need to identify what the leverage points are on the path towards that big goal and really chunked or drilled down into each of the sub goals that set you up to achieve the big goal. You need to keep track publicly of the metrics on your measurable steps. So a simple leaderboard, a Gantt chart, or something like that is generally going to be useful. It should be visible to everyone in the group or all supporters. It should show both the steps and the objective measurements of the steps. This kind of tracking tells us immediately if we are winning or losing on the big goal and the sub-goals. So you want to create some accountability by keeping track in a very, very public way of whatever the key metrics are for each of the steps towards your big goals. And you want to create accountability. That means reporting on commitments from last week, from the previous meeting, and so on. Reviewing the leaderboard, making new commitments for the coming week or the coming meeting, and telling other people in the group immediately if we're winning or losing on the big idea and sub-ideas. Now we're going to really drill down into the Dhamma, or the law of leadership. The basic beliefs, values, and assumptions that the historical Buddha taught are applicable to many leadership behaviors. So we've got this idea of anatta. If you've gone through the meditation training course, you should be familiar with this. So the historical Buddha taught that there were three characteristic marks of existence, those being dukkha, anicca, and anatta, or unsatisfactoriness, impermanence, and no permanent self. This idea of anatta, of no permanent self, of being an emergent phenomenon of all of the panchakanda, or the five aggregates, in flux, really means that, as the Buddha said, actually, every moment you're born and die, and every moment you're born and every moment you die. So as those aggregates, those five aggregates of corporeality arise and fall many times every second, millions of times every second, really, you're being born and reborn and dying in every moment. There's no unbroken stream of selfhood. It's just this stream of staccato bursts of consciousness and reflective self-consciousness or ego that's conditioned. Each one of those units, each one of those moments of consciousness is conditioned by the volition and the action and the trajectory of the previous moment of consciousness. But there's no unending stream of consciousness. It's like a machine gun burst of consciousness. So this idea of anatta really provides us with a different orientation towards time. It gives us a long-term orientation instead of a linear view of existence. And it's more collective in orientation. There's a strong focus on interpersonal relationships also, and this sort of deep ecology that we've been talking about, because you're realizing that you are the sum of the data input and the thoughts, feelings, perceptions, volition, and so on that make up this emergent self. And ultimately, everybody else is made up of that same stuff too. Everybody else is made up of the same processes. Everybody is made up of the same base elements as you are, and we're all part of a larger whole. It doesn't mean we're all the same. It doesn't mean we're all one spirit or anything like that, but it just means that you can think a little bit more ecologically, because you realize that what you are is very similar to what everybody else is. The historical Buddha also talked about the Majjhima Patipada, or the middle way, not going to extremes in behavior and thought, not being overly unhappy, not being overly happy, not training or practicing in a way that is extremely painful or excruciating, like a lot of ascetic training, and not doing nothing as well. So we want to follow this Majjhima Patipada, this middle way. This leads to consistent and moderate behavior. So extreme positions, including strategic choices, in light of this, are not really viewed positively. We've also got these 5 precepts and the Eightfold Path. So the 5 precepts are just the precepts for lay people, people who are not monks. It's really the ethical code for normal people, not stealing, not killing, so on. And then we've got the Noble Eightfold Path, the Arya Magga. This is really just about right view, right action, right livelihood, and some of the things that we've talked about before. And this just really is about ethical behavior. So Dhamma can manifest itself in different aspects of leadership, including behavior, personal development, team building, the use of harmony instead of conflict, and a more gentle approach to dealing with people. Now, you might ask, or you might wonder about the leadership style of the historical Buddha. In general, it was quite passive. He sought to benefit everyone through personal development in a passive and broad way, and he led with a reflective and introspective approach. You want to be able to maintain your own values and integrity and develop your abilities and the abilities of others around you. The Buddha said, "As a solid rock is indifferent to the wind and rain, so the wise are indifferent to criticism and praise." The leader doesn't falter because of difficulty or social pressure. Now, leadership styles may change, and usually change to fit changing situations, but the leader's values, your values as a leader, have to remain constant as a rock. We've also got this idea of the alchemist leader. This is this sort of non-dual air quadrant level of leadership, and it's the highest level of leadership. At this level, the alchemist level, the leader has the ability to transform people and organizations by blending the material and the spiritual. The alchemist leader has the ability to reinvent themselves and their group. They're not fixed in their position and leadership style, and they seek constant change, taking the characteristic of no self-management. This kind of alchemical leader uses charisma, symbols, and metaphors to reach people. They should have a high moral standard, and they have to be guided by the truth to be successful. They also need to be open to change, or anicca, and they recognize that they're in a constant state of change themselves. Effective leadership requires adapting to never-ending change while remaining steady in your principles. So this is really the highest level of leadership that we're talking about, and that's why we're focusing more on ontological leadership, or leadership as a way of being, rather than specific management techniques or leadership techniques or anything like that. Really what we want to train you to do is just be stable and steady in your principles, develop your principles to the highest level possible, and then be flexible outside of your principles to change to ever-changing, impermanent, always adapting situations. Now, we want to get to the idea of personal development. The point of the Dhamma that the historical Buddha taught was for people to escape the cycle of death and rebirth and make continual refinements and improvements. Again, the Buddha said, if a man should conquer in battle 1,000 and 1,000 more, and another should conquer himself, his would be the greatest victory, because the greatest of all victories is the victory over oneself. So the leader places the burden of development on himself. Not only himself, but others' development, the development of other people as well. The leader takes on this burden. We come back to this idea of dependent origination or complex interdependency or deep ecology yet again. Nothing exists by itself, but everything has a cause. Often, or generally, multiple causes, not really any first cause. Mindfulness and self-discipline are important aspects of personal development. This simultaneously promotes self-determination. The Buddha himself said, only a man himself could be master of himself. Who else could be his master? When the master and servant are one, then there is true help and true self-possession. The development of others should lead to the goal of producing individuals who don't need any supervision or don't need to be micromanaged. A person who's internalized the mission and goals of the group and is capable of self-management and being their own master is what we really want. A Dhammic-led group is one in which less emphasis is placed on command and control, and a greater emphasis is placed on developing the ability of individuals to manage themselves. So when it comes to personal development, we want to develop ourselves to the greatest extent possible. We also want to develop our team or our group or the people around us to the greatest extent possible so that you can inspire them, you can be the pathfinder for them, but you don't have to micromanage them all the time. On the topic of team building, Dhamma is generally consistent with a collectivist view. That concept of anatta, or no permanent self, implies that we're not individuals like you would normally think of in Western terms. We're not really autonomous and independent entities, and our identities are linked to our association with others. The Buddha said that all the great rivers, on reaching the great ocean, lose their former names and identities and are reckoned simply as the great ocean. Our ability to view ourselves as part of a larger social ecosystem and make necessary sacrifices for effective team functioning requires us to be able to transcend the I part of our existence. Now, the importance of individual sacrifice for the benefit of the group to promote teamwork is something that we really should think about. The Buddha said that whoever offers sacrifice or whoever gets others to do so, all these are following a curse of merit benefiting many others. Groups that promote individualism run contrary to the idea of teamwork. For the real benefits of collective action to become real, we have to start thinking differently about how we structure groups and reward systems. So let's talk a little bit more about working in harmony. Some cultures value individual competition and say it creates greater motivation and that conflict is necessary to maintain forward momentum. The Buddha said that many do not know that we are here in this world to live in harmony. Those who don't know this fight against each other. Now, early research into the value of cooperation over competition actually supports the Dhammic view. In cooperation versus competition studies, Johnson and his group found that cooperation inside of organizations produced superior results in terms of achievement. That kind of harmony comes from members of the group sharing common values and working towards a common goal. And it begins with trust and a positive view of human nature. The Buddha said that the wise one does not judge others, not their words or deeds or what they have or have not done. The wise only contemplate their own words and deeds. To create successful organizations, leaders should first seek and cultivate excellence in themselves. Again, we come back to this highest level of leadership, this level of the alchemist leader who creates a shared purpose, and they model good behavior and encourage kindness within the group. So that's what we're really striving for, is this ontological leadership at that level, this leadership as a way of being at this highest level of the alchemist leader. As we're getting to the end of this theory module, we want to give a lesson on the 4 quadrants of ethics. This is something that's a little bit outside the pale of Southern Buddhism or Theravada Buddhism, but I think it's a useful tool that might come in handy for you in your future as this sort of very conscious, very effective leader. So we've got this XY axis divided into 4 quadrants. We've got on the x-axis internal and external. On the y-axis we've got personal and group. So we've got 4 quadrants. We've got the internal personal, the internal group, the external personal, and the external group. So morality in general and ethics specifically are kind of a mess. They don't translate cross-culturally, and I can tell you that from first-hand experience, having lived in 5 or 6 different countries over the last 20 years. They never function as universal constants. We can argue about whether morality is cross-cultural or universally constant, but ethics definitely don't translate cross-culturally, and ethics definitely don't function as universal constants. So we can break the 4 quadrants of life or processes or phenomenon or whatever down into this model that we've just shown you: internal personal, internal group, external personal, and external group. So when we're evaluating a decision that we have to make or any kind of action we might take, we can quickly run the math against this model. First, we have to think about if the decision or action will result in positive or negative outcomes in the internal personal quadrant. For example, will it cause you to have a better or worse self-image? Will it cause you to feel good, better, bad, or worse about yourself? Then we want to think about whether the decision or action will create loss or gain for us in the external group quadrant. For example, will this positively or negatively affect the groups we're part of, such as family, social groups, business community, even army, and so on? If the decision or action will create loss or gain for us in the internal group quadrant is something we need to think about next. For example, are we creating a strategic imbalance which is out of our favor? And the 4th thing that we need to think about, or the 4th question we need to ask ourselves, is if the decision or action will create benefit or disadvantage for us in the external personal quadrant. So for example, will it positively or negatively affect the way we're in relation to the world around us? So for any big decision, any big action that you want to take, I would recommend, or I would prescribe, that you just go through this set of 4 questions. Really just give this a little bit of thought. When we then have to think about the two following qualifications. So decisions or actions which create gain or loss in the internal quadrants can be called useful or not useful. Decisions or actions which create gain or loss in the external quadrants can be called noble or ignoble. So we've got, let's go back up here. So we've got our matrix here. So in these two, really the earth and the air here, personal internal, personal external, we can say that these things are useful or not useful. If it creates, depending on whether it creates benefit or disadvantage. In this section, we've got group internal, group external, and we can say that something is noble or ignoble, depending on whether it creates benefit or disadvantage for the group and our relationship to the group. So, when qualifying your decisions or actions, you have to run them against a simple prioritized evaluation, going from the greatest good to the worst bad. So that prioritized matrix is going to be useful and noble, useless and noble, useful and ignoble, and useless and ignoble. Using this kind of model can allow us to quickly and easily process our decision making for very big, very important, very significant choices. For example, if we want to give a very oversimplified example, one of the 10 Commandments is thou shalt not kill, which is actually pretty broad. However, if hunting an animal is useful, for example, you need to eat urgently, and noble, your family or group needs to eat urgently, then it's a useful and noble thing to do. On the other hand, if you don't need to eat urgently, but you're hunting for sport, entertainment, because you need to feel power over something else, or for any reason like that, and nobody in your group needs to eat urgently or lacks food, it's a useless and ignoble thing to do. So that's just a very quick overview. I can go into this in quite a bit more detail. Really what you want to do is just plan this out, maybe make some charts for yourself, and just begin practicing this to develop the habit muscle to analyze decisions, analyze actions through this 4-quadrant matrix. If it's in these 2 personal quadrants, if it's beneficial to you internally and personally, it's useful. If it's bad for you internally and personally, it's useless. If it's good for you personally and externally, it's useful. If it's bad for you personally and externally, it's useless. Over here in the group internal, if it's good for you or if it's good for the group, then we can say it's noble. If it's bad for the group, we can say it's ignoble. And the same thing down here.